Reflector.
Reflector.
I'm Andy Mills, and this is Reflector. And for today, we have an announcement. But first, a bit of history. The second half of the 19th century was a time of massive change. Technologies like the light bulb, the combustion engine, the telegram, the refrigerator, the X-ray started to reshape the way people lived. The Industrial Revolution brought about enormous shifts not just in the economy, but it reordered life on this planet as we know it. There were new political thoughts entering the mainstream, there was mass migration to cities, the rise of the labor movement. And then, of course, there was the media.
Get your morning paper, Morning Star, read all about it.
Newspapers at the time were booming. Pretty much every community had at least 2 local papers, and many cities had more than a dozen local papers. New York City alone had over 20. And in this environment, competition for readers' attention escalated. Over time, headlines became more and more sensational. Stories were just chock full of exaggerated scandals and hyperbolic accusations and bad faith attacks.
X-ray! Judge takes the man's hands away from us!
And increasingly, almost just completely fabricated stories altogether.
Extra, read all about the horrible trunk murder. That trunk murder is brutal, folks. Yes, it is.
In a way, you can think of the newsboys standing there, selling the newspapers, shouting headlines at anybody who would listen as sort of the first clickbait. And eventually, this led to a crisis of trust throughout the entire media industry. By the 1890s, you have figures like Mark Twain accusing the press of spreading misinformation. Political cartoons referred to outlets as fake news, and we now refer to that entire era of American media by its nickname, yellow journalism. And the real tragedy of it all was that there was so many fascinating and consequential things happening all over the world. There were debates worth having. There were new political movements starting, new technologies to cover. But the incentives of the time did not encourage journalists to cover them well. And then, in 1896, a publisher named Adolph Ochs bought a struggling paper called the New York Times and set about trying to change things. Under Ochs, the New York Times would no longer be a partisan Republican paper. It would now be politically independent. And even more radically for the time, he championed what became known as objective journalism. He declared that unlike the yellow journalism of his peers, the Times would only publish fact-based reports. And he adopted the new motto, all the news that's fit to print. And did the New York Times always live up to these highfalutin values? No, it did not. However, even just the effort worked. Over the next few decades, the Times rose above all of its competitors, became the dominant newspaper across the country, and Ochs's approach became the new standard. And alongside editors like Sam McClure and reporters like Ida Tarbell, eventually journalists regained the trust of the American people, and they ushered in what we today refer to as the golden era of journalism. Now, fast forward to today, and here we are in the midst of another crisis. Trust in journalism right now is at an all-time low. And I know that trust in all institutions is down, but trust in the media at this point is so in the tank that in some polls, it's even lower than Congress. And I think that if we're honest with ourselves, we in the media know that we largely deserve this mistrust. A couple years ago, when Matt Boll, Megan Phelps-Roper, and myself set out to make a podcast series called The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, we were inspired in part by an attempt to try and rebuild some of that trust. And here on Reflector, we've been continuing that mission. This podcast has been an experiment, a small-scale project between Matt and myself, recorded here in my bedroom in my small town in Illinois and up in Matt's studio in Chicago. But largely thanks to the support that we've gotten from listeners like you, this experiment has grown into something far more ambitious and exciting. Over the last few months, Matt and I have been working to expand this project into a full-scale, independent media outlet. Starting today, we're going to be hiring reporters, producers, editors, and yes, if you are a friend or interested, shoot us an email. And soon, we will be publishing more podcasts, more investigative series, and we're going to continue to blend rigorous journalism with our love of complicated storytelling. So for now, we're going to take a brief hiatus, but when we return, we're going to have new shows, new hosts, and a lot more reporting. If you're new here, be sure to check out our back catalog. And if you have been a faithful listener these last few months, sincerely, thank you. We'll see you soon.